So you guys, we're going to be annotating the poem Casey at the Bat. And first we're going to go through a few elements of poetry just to make sure everybody understands. The first thing we're going to talk about is this is a narrative poem. And what that means is it's a poem that tells a story. It has characters, it has a setting, there's a plot, which means there's events that happen in order. It has a climax. All of the elements of a story are included, but except it's in poetic form. So this is a narrative poem that tells a story. You have already listened to it being read aloud, and hopefully you've watched the Disney short. So you kind of get an idea of Casey's adventures at the Bat. The next thing we're going to look at is the structure, or how the poem is organized. And from your doodle notes, you learned that most poems are organized in stanzas. Stanza is like the paragraph of poetry. And just looking at this, you can visually see the chunks of this poem. Here's a chunk, 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 and they are all exactly the same length. They are all 4 lines long. Each one of these chunks is called a stanza. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to number the stanzas. So we're going to kind of, in the middle, stanza 1, stanza 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you can see easily this has 9 stanzas. So I want you to pause the video right now, and you're going to go ahead and finish numbering your stanzas. Now you should have your poem and your stanzas numbered. You should have ended up with 13 stanzas. So the next thing we're going to look at structurally with the poem is these small numbers here. Now what those are is those are line numbers. So they're actually counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is line 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we're not going to actually number every single line. These are reference numbers. So for example, if we ask you to find line 24, you can go, oh, this is line 25. This must be line 24. Because when we have you annotate on your own, we are going to have you look at certain lines. So use these small numbers as your line reference. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to make an annotation key. We have done this many, many times this year. I'm going to use paper mates. You can use colored pencils. Just don't use a marker or anything that could go through your poem. We're going to look for 4 elements of figurative language in our first 4 stanzas. So the first one we're going to do is hyperbole. It's actually yellow, but you know, we don't ever write in yellow. So I'm writing it in black, and then I'm just going to underline it in yellow. So then we know that it's yellow. And then we're going to do idioms in red. We're going to do metaphor in blue. And then we're going to do personification that's a doozy in green. So you're going to need these 4 color-coded figurative language elements because we're going to now look for them in these stanzas. So go ahead and pause the video and make your key. And as you annotate later, you're going to need to add things to your key. So here in stanza 1, it's kind of like the exposition. We've got the setting, we've got the baseball team, the Mudville 9. They are not doing well. They are losing 4-2 with just 1 inning left to play. And the next 2 people up to bat, Cooney and Burroughs, they do really poorly. But instead, the author does not just say Cooney and Burroughs didn't do well. they use figurative language. And in this case, they use a hyperbole or an exaggeration that there's no way it could be true. And I'm going to look at line 3. It says, when Cooney died at first base, and Burroughs did the same. It says Cooney died. That's a hyperbole. Cooney did not actually die at first. He got out at first. And Burroughs did the same, which means Burroughs also got out at first. So our hyperbole, we're going to use yellow, is the exaggeration that these two players died at first. They really didn't die. They just got out. And then now we're going to go to the next stanza. There really isn't any figurative language in this stanza, but let's just kind of summarize it. This is the point when some people in the crowd are getting up and leaving because they just think it's a lost cause. There's a few people there, though, that are like clinging to the hope that if only Casey could get up to bat, we might have a chance. So that's kind of like some people would even bet on it. Casey is so good that if he just got a chance, we could maybe win. So really there's no figurative language here, but the story does continue. So let's look at the third stanza. And in this stanza, people are just really bummed because the two players that were up to bat before Casey, Flynn preceded Casey, which means Flynn came before Casey. So did Jimmy Blake. So these two players got to bat before Casey, and listen how the poet describes them. And the former was a pudding, while the latter was a cake. Now, former and latter simply means first one in a list and the second one in a list. So the former, Flynn, was a pudding. The latter, Jimmy, was a cake. Now, Flynn was a pudding. Blake was a cake. So Flynn wasn't literally pudding and Blake wasn't literally cake. We are saying one thing is compared to another, and those are metaphors. So we're going to underline former was a pudding, latter was a cake in blue because it's a metaphor. You know what I noticed? We do need to go back to stanza 3. There was another little figurative language nugget in there. So after the metaphors of pudding and cake, we have a personification. So we have an object or a thing being given human-like qualities. And it's actually in line 11. So on that stricken multitude, a death-like silence sat. So our object is silence. And what is it doing that only a human can do? It's sitting. Silence cannot actually sit. Silence just is there. But we're personifying it by saying that it kind of sat on everybody that was there. They were just shocked. So a death-like silence sat is personification. And then our last stanza, there's lots of idioms in this stanza. Remember, an idiom is a phrase that the words together mean more than what they would be separately. It's kind of like a cliche or a saying. So in this, we have, they are shocked because Flynn and Blake actually didn't do bad. They both, to the wonderment of everybody, got on base. So Flynn got a single, and Blakely, who normally they hate, tore the cover off the ball. He didn't literally tear the cover off the ball. It's an expression or an idiom. And it simply means he hit that ball so hard and so fast and so far, it's like he tore the cover off the ball. It's an idiom. And then it says, and when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, meaning it all happened so fast, in such a flurry, people didn't even know what happened. And the idiom is, when the dust had lifted. and men saw what had occurred. There was Blakey, safe at second, and Flynn a huggin' third. So Flynn, remember, he was on first base. Blakey hit this huge ball that allows Flynn to run to third. Now Blakey's on second. So it says Flynn a huggin' third. It's another idiom. When you're hugging something, you're right at it. You're right next to it. So he's at third. So there's 3 idioms or 3 sayings in stanza 4. Now you're going to be now going into your poetry packet, and we have some directions on how to annotate the remaining stanzas all the way to 13. Follow the directions very carefully. We pretty much tell you what to do and what to find in each stanza and each line. Good luck.